If there is no God, murder isn't wrong. This is the video I'm going to be tackling by Prager University.
Do you believe that good and evil exist? The answer to this question separates Judeo-Christian values from secular values. Let me offer the clearest possible example: murder. Is murder wrong? Is it evil? Nearly everyone would answer yes, but now I will pose a much harder question. How do you know?
Simple. How do I know murder is wrong? It's self-evident. Otherwise, you would use the term killing. Is killing wrong? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. But murder is always wrong. Why? Because that is an inherently moral term. That's like asking, is it wrong to wrongfully is it wrong to wrongfully kill someone? Which is technically what murder is. Now, in legal terms, it's sparsed out depending on the exact circumstances, because even though you might technically be guilty of a wrongful killing, it might not have been intentional, you might have been technically culpable, but unintentional, like negligent homicide, and all those varying degrees of it. But yeah, murder, technically by its very nature, is wrong. Killing, however, taking someone else's life or something's life, it's only wrong in certain circumstances, like when we consider it to be murder. Now, what you consider to be murder is completely different depending on the person. Now, there is a general consensus that killing someone unprovoked or not in self-defense is murder. So yeah, that's basically my little spiel on that.
I'm sure you think murder is wrong, but how do you know? If I asked you how you know that the Earth is round, you would show me photographs from outer space or offer me measurable data. But what photographs could you show? What measurements could you provide?
No, I could provide you the definition of what we consider to be murder. That murder is inherently a moral term, like I just said, and that killing, we can't prove that killing is wrong, but we can prove that murder is.
That prove that murder or rape or theft is wrong.
Now, rape is a little bit, I would say, a little bit more similar, a little bit not so similar, because what we define rape as is having sex with someone against their will. Now, we can define that as, now we could technically define it as sex that shouldn't have happened, but that's very vague, and I think the previous definition is actually more viable, which would mean you couldn't really say why is rape wrong. I'll give him props on rape, so really what he should say is killing, in which cases it's not completely wrong either. Murder, killing, which is technically what he really means, is a lot more gray. Rape is pretty much universally thought of as wrong, because who wants it done unto them? Now, some people are assholes and they don't really care. They don't have empathy for people, and so they just do it. Theft, taking things that isn't yours. Yeah, it's not necessarily wrong. I agree, you can't prove that theft is wrong, or technically that rape is wrong, because it's all subjective. But murder, yeah, easily proven.
The fact is, you can't. There are scientific facts, but without God, there are no moral facts.
I disagree, but only slightly. Well, I disagree in the fact that you can't, even with God, still are no moral facts, because God prescribes a lot of immoral things that we have the ability to question and think are actually immoral. So either God doesn't exist and morality is very subjective, or two, God existing doesn't entail that there are moral facts. But even then, I still believe in some moral facts. Now, of course, in order to arrive at those, the definitions need to be very broad as to not have any specific moral implications in them, and need to have value judgments within the definition, like murder, for example. Murder, by definition, is wrong, because it is pretty much a killing that shouldn't be done. The fact that murder is wrong is a moral fact. Killing is wrong is not a moral fact. That is a subjective moral. So moral facts are facts that are defined as having a moral value, or actions that are defined as being good or bad. If you consider something to be murder, it is by definition you're considering it to be wrong. If you consider it not murder, then it is not wrong. I don't know how well I'm explaining it, but basically, yeah. Moral facts, words that intrinsically have judgment built into them, saying that those things have that value, are moral facts.
In a secular world, there can only be opinions about morality. They may...
Technically, yes. I mean, some people like Sam Harris try and rationalize this sort of New Age sort of, well, not New Age Deepak Chopra, but atheist kind of morality. I don't really agree with it. I think it's good on the intent is good, but basically, yeah, true morality is subjective opinion. There is no objective morals because, let's face it, this is not a moral world. We do not live in a moral world. We live in a dog-eat-dog world, okay? It is harsh, it is at times virtually inhospitable, but we, as probably the most intelligent species of primate, have basically conquered pretty much the entire world. We are the most prosperous invasive species to have ever walked this earth. And I kind of lost my train of thought, but yeah.
Maybe personal opinions or society's opinions, but only opinions.
Mm-hmm.
Every atheist philosopher I have read or debated on this subject has acknowledged that...
I don't know when my roommate's going to come in, so I'm a little bit... so then I'll have to stop recording, but yeah.
If there is no God, there is no objective morality.
There's no objective morality, period. Even if there was a God, half the stuff he said is in his dog shit Bible, I don't agree with. I mean, there's some good, happy and love stuff, but it's pretty much only for his followers. Only for the followers of Christ, or if you're Jewish, followers of Moses. And then God's chosen people. Everyone else can be made into slaves, and women are treated as dog shit. Yeah, I don't agree. Even if this God did exist, his so-called objective morality, I would completely disagree with it. I think it is completely immoral. And that this God, I would rather go to hell than be subjected to the tyranny of heaven.
Christian values are predicated on the existence of a God of morality. In other words, only if there is a God who says murder is murder wrong. Otherwise, all morality is opinion. The entire Western world, what we call Western civilization, is based on this understanding.
No, it isn't. It is based on social contracts that say we all, or the vast majority of us, have decided that these things are wrong and that these things are necessary for the maintenance of a civil free society. Without those, and that we will enforce these things through laws and law enforcement, not God, because technically, if it was based on God saying it, what we really have would be a theocracy. And a theocracy says you cannot question the state because the state has the inherent right, is the divine right of God to rule over you meek people, which basically begs for totalitarianism. It is totalitarianism. It is the tyrant in heaven ruling over the meek people on earth. Okay? That is basically what, but we don't have that. We don't have the thing Dennis Prager thinks about as Western civilization. We used to have that, but we got rid of it because that stuff is bullshit. From the Enlightenment, we realized, hey, we can't have theocratic authoritarians ruling our governments. We need to have a secular state. We need to have freedoms for individual people because individual people have different opinions on how things should be run naturally. And in order to maintain a free civil society, everyone's right to have their opinion must be respected. Now, you might not respect the specific opinions, but their right to have the opinions must be respected in order to maintain the civilized society.
Now, let me make two things clear. First, this doesn't mean that if you don't believe in God, you can't be a good person. There are
That's great, and that's true.
plenty of kind and moral individuals who don't believe in God and Judeo-Christian values. But the existence of these good people has nothing to do with the question of whether good and evil really exist if there is no God. Second, there have been plenty of people who believed in God who were not good people. Indeed,
of course,
more than a few have been evil and have even committed evil in God's name. The existence of God doesn't ensure people will do good. I wish.
Yeah, though they're only good and evil according to our opinion, the majority's opinion, and so forth. What we have deemed to be evil and good in society and everywhere else. That we have this sense of morality that we have instilled in our kids and our fellow citizens. That's where we judge them by. Not the tyrant, not a sky tyrant in heaven. We don't judge them by.
Wish it did. The existence of God only ensures that good and evil objectively exist and are not merely opinions.
Not really. Unless if you're claiming that, then God clearly does not exist. You are straight up, I think Dennis Prager might actually be atheist, because he's literally, if this is true, he's literally just proved that God does not exist. He's either a stupid theist or a hard atheist trying to subtly give this premise to religious people so that if they manage to gain an ounce of critical thinking, they'll realize, well, this is obviously true because Dennis Prager is a well-respected and intellectual individual. If this statement is true, God does not exist, because good and evil exist, but our perceptions of them are entirely opinion. And there is no objective morality that we have to, at least as of now, we haven't found it. We have not found it. Could it technically exist somewhere? Yeah, but we don't have it. Especially because the supposed objective morality said by God is completely immoral, as I've said. And I would consider a decent amount of what this God says to be actually evil. Especially the God Dennis Prager believes in, because there's a lot of confusion as to whether Jesus, because there's some verses that say that he kind of repudiates, but not quite, of all the horrible shit God advocated in the Torah. But the God in the Torah, the Jewish book, is a complete evil piece of shit. At least according to my opinion. And there's very little good, if at all. And a lot of the things that I would consider evil are portrayed as good in the Bible. Which in my opinion, disproves that, but you can't 100% prove that. But you can also prove objectively that that objective morality exists. So he hasn't proven it. He has not proven a God. His point is moot.
God, we therefore end up with what is known as moral relativism, meaning that morality is not absolute, but only relative to the individual or to the society.
Absolutely. That is what we actually have. That is what nature has. Now, it's just, the thing is, I would say it's more or less relative to the species, because different species have a different culture and a different sort of sense of morality of what they think is acceptable. They have a different society. Now, we as humans, we would think some of the things other animals do is kind of fucked up, but that's how they do it. And now, since we have attained a higher level of cognitive, we have developed a higher level of communication, basically the ability to have multi-societies where we can actually argue about shit with not just "rawr" sort of things, but actual different languages. We just think about this way too much and take ourselves way too seriously. But yeah, moral relativism is the state of the world, and the supposed religious objective morality is also relative. How many Christians don't believe 100% in the objective moral word of God? Tons. So much so that you could argue that a lot of them are not actually Christians. A lot of them are not actually Jewish and not actually Muslim. If they were, they'd be horrendous pieces of shit, but I digress.
Without God, the words good and evil are just another way of saying I like and I don't like. If there is no...
Pretty much, yeah. Though sometimes in the real world it's occasionally I don't really like, but it's necessary. But it's necessary for the maintenance of a civil society, or I don't like at all. It's a spectrum.
No God, the statement murder is evil is the same as the statement I don't like murder.
They're not technically the same statement. You can say you don't like murder, but murder is technically evil. You can say killing is evil. You can say any form of killing is murder, and you say I don't like it when things are killed. Technically, I would say yeah, that's pretty much the same thing. But saying murder is evil is like saying a wrongful killing of a person is evil. In other words, a wrongful killing is wrong, is kind of what you're saying in a nutshell when you say murder is bad or evil or wrong.
Now, many will argue that you don't need moral absolutes. People won't murder because they don't want to be murdered. But that argument is just wishful thinking. Hitler stopped.
I do agree. To some extent, it is wishful thinking. To some extent. But as a whole, if you agree as a society that murder is wrong and you have it set in stone in your law books that it is wrong to murder, that you shouldn't murder, there are going to be less murders. There's going to be fewer murders. Especially in Texas, because the state will murder you if you murder someone else. So, which I don't agree with because, I mean, one, I think one murder doesn't equal a death sentence. Two, even if it did, there's a 4% chance that you're going to be wrongfully executed. And I don't believe in the death. One, I do think some punishments are worthy of the death penalty, but only if there is a 100% certainty that they're guilty of that heinous crime, of that completely heinous crime. Otherwise, maybe life in prisons, so you have so you have the chance to actually release them, give them their freedom back in case evidence comes out that overturns their conviction. That's the system I would favor.
Stalin and Mao didn't want to be murdered, but that hardly stopped them from murdering about 100 million people.
Yet,
it is not a coincidence.
Christians murder all the time. There's always going to be murder. Again, it's all about you're never going to stop anything by prohibiting it, but you can drastically reduce the amount. So the real question is outlawing murder better than making murder legal? Well, maybe I don't like my new neighbor. Maybe he's being a bit of an asshole. Murder. Well, I don't like him. It's completely legal. You see the rabbit hole you go down. It's like The Purge, a horror film, okay? That's what comes of a society that legally allows murder. Self-defense is a different story. I think that's a good society, but generally, allowing murder tends to be downfall of society.
Coincidence that the rejection of Judeo-Christian values in the Western world by Nazism and communism led to the murder?
No, actually, to some extent, Nazism and communism embraced Judeo-Christian values. Why? Because when the Puritans, because they were pure Christians, they didn't want any ungodly activity going on, they ended up murdering witches. People which is based on hearsay. It was authoritarianism, which is what Hitler and Stalin were, authoritarians. When you embrace Judeo-Christian values in all their glory, you get similar systems. Not exactly the same, but pretty damn similar. You get persecutions of the other, which is basically what those were. In Hitler's case, other groups of people. In Stalin's case, other ideologies that dared criticize him and his regime.
Murder of all these innocent people. It is also not a coincidence that the first societies in the world to abolish slavery, an institution that existed in every known society in human history, were Western societies rooted in Judeo-Christian values. And so were the first.
Not really. I mean, the first societies rooted in Judeo-Christian values actually practiced slavery. I mean, one of the core, it's not like you can't possibly, from the Bible, derive that slavery is wrong. It's just that you have to be thinking critically and not within the narrative of the Bible. Because the narrative of the Bible says that slavery for me and my people, for us the Israelites, is bad. But slavery for everyone else is fine. And allowing everyone else to be slaves. So from that you can derive that, hey, being a slave is something terrible. And you don't want to be a slave. From that you can derive that if it's not fine for me, why should it be fine for anyone else? If you're thinking critically. If you're just taking the Bible's word for it, then other people can be made into slaves. But not you or your people. But your slaves should come from foreigners, from foreign lands. That's the Bible. Slavery was largely adopted from the abolitionist movements. Now, you can make the argument that they were majority Christian, but so was the majority of Western societies that practiced it. So you could argue that there was practically no one else to want to abolish it but other Christians. But really, in terms of the theological argument based on does God support slavery, the slave owners and the slave-holding people were in the right, at least in terms of the Judeo-Christian values debate. I mean, it's spelled out perfectly in the Bible. Even if your master is terrible to you, you must submit yourself to them and continue to obey them. Do not run away. Slavery is fine. There are certain restrictions imposed, but by and large, it is condoned. The abolition of slavery was primarily due to the pervasive influence of critical thinking and secular values eeping their ways into the minds of Christians and Jews who empathized with these black people, with these Africans, that when they saw the beatings and the terrible treatment, they were like, oh my gosh, if that were done to me, I would hate that. We shouldn't do that to these people. Of course, racism was still a huge problem, and so, yeah. I mean, they're not my equal, but I wouldn't wish this upon them anyway. That's what the pervasive narrative at the time was. This was an evil institution. We should not be subjecting these people to it. So it was not thanks to Judeo-Christian values. The abolition of slavery came about in spite of them.
Societies to affirm universal human rights, to emancipate women.
Universal human rights. You realize that the Bible condemns other people of different faiths, condemns their beliefs. Thou shalt have, in the Ten Commandments, it says, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Known. That is not religious toleration. That is religious intolerance. Many people were either subjugated or killed for having a different religious belief in Judeo-Christian societies, in practicing Judeo-Christian values. When we moved to secular values, human rights were established. Or at least more secular societies. Not completely secular societies, but more secular societies. Because secular means neutral. We're not taking a side in any religion or another, or non-belief. That's what secular values is. We're not taking a side. We're going to be completely neutral. And the emancipation of women, you realize women are completely subjugated. Under the Bible, under the Quran, Judeo-Christian values are pretty much in lockstep with Islamic values in a lot of these things, and especially with regards to women. We did not emancipate women thanks to religious values. We emancipated women thanks to them and a lot of secular thinking men, reasonable thinking men, who demanded their rights, who demanded rights for women. Okay? That's where emancipation of women comes from. It comes in spite of Judeo-Christian values. Because in many parts of the world, women were more or less freer to do things. When Judeo-Christian values came in with the church and everything, some of the rights that they had enjoyed were stripped from them when the church came and imposed Christianity. So facts directly contradict this.
And to proclaim the value of liberty.
Liberty. You are literally you're literally worshiping the tyrant in heaven, as I have said. Liberty is literally the symbol of Satan. Now, technically, it's all chaos, it's torture and everything, but you're free. You can do whatever the fuck you want. You can sin. You can sin in peace in hell. Okay? That's basically what Satan technically represents. He represents our inner urge for freedom, our inner rebel. God is the very antithesis of liberty. He is order and control and authoritarianism. Judeo-Christian values are the rejection of liberty. It is the submission. It compels you to submit to a tyrant, a celestial tyrant. Now you could say, well, but the U.S. is founded on our country's founded on liberty, bro. And we're a bunch of, God-loving people, America's founded on Christianity. Yeah, the British colonies were founded on Christianity, okay? The individual colonies were. America was founded on the abolition of tyranny. In other words, our country was founded on satanic values. The values that, hey, live and let live. I don't give a shit. I don't give a shit about what you do in your bedroom. I don't give a shit about how you live your life. We're founded on libertarian satanic values of live and let live. A decent, now not complete anarchy, as we're not satanic, full-on satanic, but we have a decent amount of God. We were founded on still a decent amount of God, but a healthy dose of Satanism. But just enough God to keep everything from going to shit. I mean, literally, the story of how Lucifer fell from heaven is technically a metaphor. Is a metaphor for the American Revolution. If you think of God as England, Lucifer as Massachusetts, and the 12 other colonies as his fellow fallen angels, yeah, the metaphor aptly fits. There's some places where it doesn't completely sink in, but a lot of times analogies and metaphors rarely completely fit with what they're supposed to be describing. And on the subject of that, Genesis is a perfect story where framed from the perspective of the slave owners that slavery is good because Adam and Eve are the slaves on the plantation of Eden, because when they gain the tree of knowledge, when they eat from the tree of knowledge, they are given their emancipation. They are given their freedom. And that freedom is urged from them by the Underground Railroad snake called Satan. And when they eat that tree from the fruit of knowledge, they're given their education, they are emancipated, and it is a fall from grace. Literally, it is arguing for slavery. It is saying, oh, you can't be free because then you're landed in a terrible world where your every move isn't controlled, where you're not a slave to the master. I mean, come on. Come on. Seriously, that is completely immoral. Reread Genesis through that. Come on. Now, it doesn't line up perfectly, but it's a pretty apt comparison.
Today, the rejection of Judeo-Christian values and moral absolutes has led to a world of moral confusion.
Maybe to some extent, I would say. But I wouldn't say it leads to moral confusion. What it really leads to is a state of moral questioning, where different people question what is actually moral, what other people consider to be moral. It's led us to critically analyze why we think it's moral. Do we really think that is wrong, or do we really think that is actually good? I think this sort of confusion is a good thing, because it allows us to ponder the questions. Pondering the questions, because if we don't actually know why these things, if we don't continually arrive at the resolution that, yeah, it's bad, it's wrong, or if we don't have potent arguments for their defense, then when someone rationally comes along with a rebuttal and we don't know how to defend against that rebuttal and we start believing in it, Well, suddenly you're going to see people are advocating that the killing someone you just don't like, whether not in self-defense, but just walking up to them and killing them, essentially murder, that is completely justified. I think in that case that'd be relatively hard to do, but that's why some degree of moral confusion can actually be a good thing, because it says if you believe the status quo fervently, have cogent arguments, have good ways, have things that actually hold up to defend them. Because otherwise you basically are not you actually believing in them for the right reasons. You're believing them because of dogma. You're just going, yes, master, yes, murder is wrong. No, you should actually be able to defend why it is wrong to murder. Why what you would say is murder is wrong. The other option would be, oh, we're going to totalitarianly enforce the belief that anyone who thinks murder isn't wrong, or our definition of murder, that isn't wrong, should be locked up, and we're going to enforce it that way. That leads to totalitarianism. Let me just say, both of those are not good options. Both of them are not. So what we need is to have a healthy dose of moral confusion so that we can honestly question our morality and hope to correct things that we thought were moral but we realize now are actually horrendous. Or maybe some things we thought were horrendous but aren't actually that bad. Or things that we don't necessarily we think are bad, but they're a necessary evil. It's all those questions, all those things, all that healthy dose of moral confusion that allows us to continually question ourselves and to improve ourselves. And so that's why I would say that is actually a good thing. Because otherwise we get so fed up in our own bullshit, our own culture, our own Judeo-Christian values. And so we don't see the bullshit. We don't wake up to the smell that, oh wait, we're covered in fucking bullshit. Okay? Because we're so used to it that we think, oh wow, isn't that normal air so refreshing?
In the New York Times in March 2015, a professor of philosophy confirmed this. He wrote, "What would you say if you found out that our public schools were teaching children that it is not true that it's wrong to kill people for fun? Would you be surprised?"
I'd be surprised, honestly, because while they might not be outright, because they wouldn't outright be teaching that it is wrong to kill people for fun. They might be teaching people about different religions, different societies at large, but they wouldn't be saying that it's not wrong to kill people for fun. I mean, that's generally ingrained in society. People don't tend to question that now, because I think it would, to some extent, it would be calamitous if they started telling that to little kids. Now, as I start thinking critically, I think that might be more appropriate to tell them, hey, it's not technically wrong. Because to kill people for fun, technically it's not really wrong. I mean, collectively we consider it wrong because that's so fucking scary. I mean, could you imagine the societal impact of it being okay to kill people for fun? I mean, it would literally be the purge. That's the purge. No one wants to live in the fucking purge, okay? I mean, come on. It's not technically objectively wrong, but on a collective subjective level, it definitely is, regardless of God. And if you think, typically, if you're a part of the minority that thinks it's socially acceptable to kill people for fun, they'll send you to a doctor. They'll send you to the loony bin. Okay, I don't know to what extent we still do that or how it works, but yeah, you definitely be referred to a psychiatrist because that's not fucking normal behavior.
I was. The professor then added, the overwhelming majority of college freshmen view moral claims as mere opinions.
As they should. Morality is completely subjective, as I've said, even your objective morality is actually subjective. I think Cosmic Skeptic, otherwise known as Alex O'Connor, does an amazing video on this. Because your claims to your morality are slim. They're reliant on a being that may or may not actually be there, even if he was. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is completely moral, because many of the things that, at least in the book, you are proclaiming to be the objective moral truth of good and evil is completely immoral.
So then, whatever you believe about God or religion, here is a fact. Without a God who is the source of morality, morality is just a matter of opinion. So, if you want a good world, the death of Judeo-Christian values should frighten you.
No, the death of Judeo-Christian values does not frighten me. The death of Judeo-Christian values makes me happier. Sure, it's a little bit scarier than saying, this is wrong, this is right, no exceptions. Or a few exceptions if you're a homo, if you're a heretic, if you do not believe in me, and if you eat shellfish, if you're an adulterer, but only if you're a female, because, of course, men, it is virtually impossible, according to the Bible, for a man, if he can at all, to be found guilty of adultery, because men are not expected to be faithful to their wives, to their wife, because they can have multiple wives to satisfy them. Oh, I'm in a Ashley mood today, or I'm in a Jessica mood today, that's the kind of, but the women couldn't sleep around, the men were perfectly allowed to sleep around, okay? That's a part of Judeo-Christian values. It's a sexually repressive thing, and it's a good thing we don't organize our lives around Judeo-Christian values, especially because secular values are the reason we have all these freedoms. Now, to an extent, we probably might not have had our secular values without Judeo-Christian values. Why? Because you have to react, because in large part you have to see horrendous shit to know, oh, that's bad. And Judeo-Christian values are horrendous shit. So secular values is like, that's bad. We're not going to do it anymore. So yeah, to some extent, if you consider Judeo-Christian values as the terrible thing that caused the reaction of secular values, then yeah, Judeo-Christian values did do a lot of great things. But it was because it was so terrible that it basically gave birth to its antithesis.
I'm Dennis Prager.
And you're wrong. To some extent, you're right. A clock is right 2 times a day, at least. Unless it's a moving clock. Then it's not really right at all.